Have you ever just felt like you had to get away? Not on Southwest. Just get away. Felt like life had given you more than you could handle, where you've been maybe deeply disappointed. Can you remember a time when everything you did in life seemed right, and yet things didn't work out how you planned, how you wanted? Have you ever grieved the death of a loved one, a dream, an identity, a future? Your life ever been shattered? If any of those are true, then you know what it's like to be Cleopas and his companion. It's Easter afternoon. 2 disciples are leaving Jerusalem. Who can blame them? Jerusalem has become a place of pain and sorrow and loss. It's a place of death, unmet expectations, and disappointment. It's a place where lives were shattered. No one wants to stay in that kind of place. I don't. Would you? Well, as they walk along this road to Emmaus, they're talking about all the things that had happened, and I suspect all the things that they expect didn't happen. So easy to imagine these two characters walking down the road. We can almost hear them talking about what happened. And as they're talking, a man joins them and asks them, "Hey, what's going on? What are you talking about?" And I can just see both men looking at him as if he were from another planet. And then hearing the first man as he explains to his new companion, hey, let me tell you, I don't know how you didn't figure this out or see this, but it's been a crazy, crazy week. Just a week ago, there was this impromptu parade. It was an amazing moment. Many of us were gathered, and they were throwing their cloaks and palm fronds on the path, and this amazing man was riding into the city of Jerusalem on a donkey. And this man was a prophet. Over the last several years, he's continued. He said this guy's reputation was growing and growing. The stuff he taught was truly inspiring. Not like our boring old rabbi, right, Cleo? I mean, he hung out with anyone, even those who drank too much. Right, Cleo? And those who slept around. Cleo and I always enjoyed being with him. He'd smile, he'd laugh, and he'd ask such thoughtful questions. He could bring to light the Scriptures in ways that even baffled the temple leaders. And on top of it, this Jesus of Nazareth did so many extraordinary things. He helped some of our fishermen friends bring in the biggest haul of fish they had ever seen. He took a young boy's actually, his sack lunch and used it to feed thousands. He helped a paralyzed man walk again, blind man to see. And get this, just a couple weeks ago, we heard from Mary and Martha that their brother, one of Jesus' own friends, was brought back to life after having died 4 days before. But even though Jesus did such amazing things and was such an amazing man of God, he and his influence apparently threatened our religious leaders. And so our leaders handed him over to the Roman government for treason as one who claimed to be a king. Jesus was sentenced to death, executed immediately after being sentenced. It all happened so quickly. Both Cleo and I hoped that this Jesus was the one, the Messiah, that had been promised for so many years to our people. But our hope was dashed by his murder. Yes, his murder on Friday. Still, I got to tell you, there's some strange things going on. A few of our friends went to the grave this morning, but they didn't find his body. That was kind of weird, huh? The women came back and told us they'd seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then Peter and John, two of Jesus' closest disciples, went to the grave as well and found it just as the woman had said, empty. But they didn't see Jesus. Well, then the man who had recently joined these two on their walk towards the village of Emmaus challenged them both boldly. He said, how foolish you guys are, and how slow to believe all the prophets of what they've spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and die and then enter his glory? And then he interpreted to them all the prophecies concerning this Messiah, from Moses to Isaiah to Jeremiah to Daniel to Micah and many others. And he showed them how this Messiah was to come, to live, to die, and to be resurrected. Cleo and his friend listened intently to all that they had heard this learned man say. It was like he had some kind of inside information on how to know all of this stuff and how it all fit together with the Messiah. He had to be some sort of rabbi or teacher, they assumed. Well, the conversation carried on as they walked together. Soon they were approaching their village, and it was getting late in the afternoon. And so Cleo and his friend invited this man to have dinner with them. Seemed like the teacher was heading further past the village, but Cleo convinced him to join them, finally by joking with him. He says, hey, you got to eat sometime, don't you? Come and eat with us. So they went into Emmaus, went up to Cleo's house, and after relieving themselves from walking in this heat, they washed up, sat down to dinner. When at dinner, Cleo asked the teacher, would you bless our meal in prayer for us? And the teacher graciously did. And after he prayed, the teacher picked up the basket of bread and started to pass it around the table. At this point, Cleo and his friend looked intently at the teacher, and all of a sudden, they said their eyes were opened. They recognized that this teacher actually looked exactly like Jesus. And as if a light went on in their head, they turned to each other with excitement and said, it is Jesus. Looking back towards the teacher, they saw that he was no longer there. So they jumped up and they ran around the table, scurried to find him, went outside, called his name. But Jesus was nowhere to be found. He'd vanished. Cleo, that was Jesus. As we were walking side by side on the road, I guess I never looked at him that closely. I don't know how I didn't recognize him, but that was him. Who else could explain the scriptures like he did? We got to get back to the rest of the disciples in Jerusalem. Tell them all that we have seen and heard about this Jesus, that we had seen him, that he is alive. And so they quickly headed back to Jerusalem to tell the others what they had seen. That they had seen Jesus, the resurrected Lord. Can you imagine what that must have been like? I think in your own life, if you think about it, when important moments, when things happen, when something pivotal goes on, those where were you when that happened moments occur. You remember. Those of you who are probably my age or older probably have been asked, where were you when JFK got shot? I was at recess in 7th grade, and I can still remember our teachers calling us in to class to tell us what had happened. Or probably more, not necessarily importantly, but more rememberable, where were you on September 11th, 2001, when those 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers, when those terrorists took down the Twin Towers? I remember being in Sacramento in a hotel room that morning, looking at the TV and thinking, as I've mentioned before, that it must have been a movie that was going on, until I finally realized that it had happened for real. I was getting ready to be interviewed by the Sacramento Presbytery Committee on Ministry. And when I met with him, that was all we could talk about. So if you or a friend were walking after one of these monumental events and you were talking about the sheer magnitude of what had happened, and someone joined you and said, "Hey, what are you talking about?" Wouldn't you be surprised too? I'm sure you'd think that they'd been living under some kind of a rock if they knew nothing about it. And then we recognize that these 2 disciples of Jesus walked all that way on the road to Emmaus without recognizing him. Text didn't say that Jesus was in a disguise. They just said they didn't recognize him. Imagine having all the evidence of a risen Lord, his words, the words of the angels, and now you have seen the risen Lord standing right in front of you, and you can't recognize him. You just stand there staring at a stranger, looking sad. Well, actually, that's not that hard to imagine either. There are many of us who know what it is like. You know what the Lord has said about love and grace and forgiveness and new life. We know the words of the angels. We know about the story of new life. We can dress up in Easter colors and sing, "Christ is alive." But the brightness of the sanctuary and the scent of Easter lilies often fade a mile or 2 down the road. Soon that Easter trumpet transitions into a car horn blasting at that crazy driver who cut in front of us. You don't have to travel too many miles down the Easter road before we're caught in the traffic of the world, the hard realities of what we see and know. Violence, betrayal, lies, subterfuge. Or we have friends that die. We are taken over by our worries and frustrations. We get easily angered by time lost, bitter about what is and what should have been. Dreams of the perfect life we thought we would have shattered. We just can't seem to put the pieces together. You see, we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel, to redeem us. We had such great hopes. How far do we get from Easter before we stop on the road and stare at one another, looking so sad? Any stranger can recognize the hypocrisy between what we say we believe and how we actually live it out. "Oh, how foolish you are," says the stranger, "and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared." Now, I'm sure you've heard the story probably many times about the man who was caught in a storm. He's approached by a sheriff department who said, "Hey, we need to clear everybody out. There's going to flood coming. The rain's coming down. You need to leave." He goes, "Oh, no, I'm not worried. God's with me. He'll save me if necessary." Flood enters the man's house, and he has to get to the roof. A neighbor rows by in a rowboat and says, "Hey, neighbor, you might want to jump into my rowboat. It's getting really high." And he goes, "Oh, no. It's okay. I have faith in God. God will save me." Finally, a helicopter flies over. It's lowering a basket and says, you better get in right now. The flood is continuing. It's going to overtake your home. Same reply. Eventually, waters overcome the man. He has nothing left to hold on to when he drowns. When he gets to heaven, God's waiting for him and shakes his head in disbelief. He says, what are you doing here? You weren't supposed to be here yet. The man said to God, I am a man of faith. I had faith that you were going to save me. What happened? God laughed a big laugh. I sent you sheriff's deputy, a boat, and a helicopter. What more did you need? Even though his faith was strong, he didn't recognize the Lord at work around him. How many times have we seen that in our own lives or the lives of someone we care about? The times when Jesus is fully walking down the road, accompanying us, and we just don't recognize him for what he is and that he was and is with us. Thank goodness there are others who will help us see him if we can't. Even if we feel alone and isolated, even if we struggle to see Christ at work in our own lives, there are others who walk along with us to help us see it. As we travel along the road to Emmaus, struggling with one another about what to make of it all, every once in a while we meet a stranger along the way who opens our eyes and we grasp a flicker of recognition. And as you travel that road to Emmaus, you may meet Karen Armstrong. Karen Armstrong's one of the foremost authorities on religion, written dozens of books on the religions of the world. She insists that religion is not about believing things. Religion's about behavior. Religion is about behaving differently. And you can bet that our friends on the road to Emmaus behave differently after experiencing the risen Christ. Armstrong tells the famous story of the great Rabbi Hillel, the older contemporary teacher of Jesus. A pagan came to Rabbi Hillel and offered to convert to Judaism if the rabbi could recite the whole of Jewish teachings while he stood on one leg. So he stood on one leg and said, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That is the Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and study it. Go and study it, and in your studies, you must make it clear that every single word of the Torah is a commentary on the Golden Rule. He went on to say that any interpretation of Scripture which leads to hatred or disdain or contempt of other people, any other people whatsoever, was illegitimate. Augustine, one of the great church fathers, made exactly the same point. Scripture, he said, Scripture teaches nothing but charity, and we must not leave any interpretation of Scripture until we have found a compassionate interpretation of it. What would our world be like if everything we did through the lens of the Golden Rule? For those of us who call ourselves Christians, recognizing Christ, recognizing the divine in the stranger is the pathway to peace and justice and mercy. As you know, the truth is, Jesus was in Jerusalem before Cleopas and his companion ever left. He was with them on the road to Emmaus. He was with them in the breaking of the bread, and he was in Jerusalem when they returned. You know what those intersections are called? They're called the gifts of God for the people of God. Jesus walks with each of us along that road. It's our challenge and our opportunity to recognize Jesus in the faces of those we meet. That Jesus might minister to us, open our ears and our eyes, and that together we may recognize the Christ. And then do something about it. Amen. Our